The night Dorian Voss walked into Anchor and Salt, I thought the worst thing that could happen was spilling a drink on his $3,000 suit. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things that night. It was a Tuesday in late October, which meant the restaurant was half empty, and I was running both the bar section and 2 corner tables by myself, because Jonah had called out sick and our manager, Dale, had decided that was somehow my problem to solve. My feet had been hurting since hour 4 of a double shift. My hair kept falling out of its clip, and Ethan, my 5-year-old, currently at home with Mrs. Kowalski from 4B, who charged $20 an hour and went to bed herself by 9, had woken up that morning with a fever that had broken by noon, but still left me checking my phone every 20 minutes, like some kind of anxious reflex I couldn't turn off. So when the host seated a man at table 11 at 8:45, 15 minutes before the kitchen closed, I took exactly 1 breath to collect myself and walked over. I didn't recognize him at first. Anchor and Salt was nice. Real linen napkins, a wine list that required actual knowledge to navigate, the kind of place where the bread cost $12 and people were grateful for it. But it wasn't the sort of place that attracted genuine power. It attracted lawyers celebrating promotions, couples on anniversary dinners, the occasional visiting professor from Columbia treating a grad student to something nicer than they deserved. Dorian Voss was not any of those things. He sat alone at a foretop, which I'd always found a particular kind of telling. Men who were used to having space took space without thinking about it. His jacket was dark, his shirt open at the collar, no tie. He was looking at his phone when I approached, and when he looked up, I felt something I couldn't immediately name. Not attraction, exactly. More like the sensation of stepping off a curb you didn't realize was there. His eyes were gray. Not the soft kind. The kind that reminded you that certain things in nature looked calm right before they became catastrophic. "Good evening," I said. "My name's Wren. Can I start you with something from the bar while you look at the menu?" He studied me for a moment. Not in the way men sometimes did at the end of a long night, when the lighting got dim and their judgment got worse. He looked at me the way someone examines something they're genuinely trying to understand. "Sparkling water," he said, "and whatever the kitchen thinks is worth making in the next 15 minutes. I almost smiled. Usually late arrivals wanted to order the full prefix and act like the kitchen owed them something. This was different. "I'll see what I can do," I said. He went back to his phone. I went back to the bar. I didn't think much about it after that. He ate whatever Marcus, our sous chef, sent out, a seared branzino with charred leeks and something citrusy I'd forgotten the name of. He drank 2 glasses of water, left a $400 tip on a $200 bill, and was gone before I'd finished rolling silverware. The tip, I assumed, was a mistake. Or guilt money, the kind wealthy men left when they'd inconvenienced someone, without caring enough to apologize. I split it with the busser and tried not to think about it. He was back on Thursday. Same table, same jacket, same gray eyes that felt like they were measuring something I couldn't see. He ordered the tasting menu this time. Asked me what I'd recommend from the wine list, which was either a test or genuine curiosity. I chose to treat it like the second thing. And I walked him through 3 options based on what Marcus was sending out from the kitchen. He chose the one I'd have chosen. He thanked me by name. "You remembered my name," I said before I could stop myself. He looked almost amused. "You told it to me." "I know," I said. "Most people don't retain it past the appetizer." That earned a real smile. Small but real. Something shifted in his expression, a fraction of warmth that appeared and disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. I didn't imagine it. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Always alone. Always at table 11 if it was available, 11B if it wasn't. He started asking for me specifically, which Dale informed me of, with the kind of significant look I had to work very hard to ignore. He was a regular by November, and regulars meant reliable income, which meant I stopped trying to find reasons to have someone else cover his table. We talked, sometimes, not about anything important. He asked about the wine program once, how we sourced it, whether I'd had formal training or just picked it up. I told him the truth. 2 years of community college, 1 wine certification course I'd taken online after Ethan was born, a lot of reading because I couldn't afford to learn by doing. He'd listened in that way he had, like he was actually filing the information away somewhere. He never volunteered anything about himself. I never asked. That should have been enough of a warning, probably. The night things changed was a Thursday in early December. Ethan had been in and out of the pediatric cardiologist's office twice that week. A routine monitoring thing, nothing acute, but the word routine had stopped meaning anything to me the day they'd first found the murmur. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and 2 cups of coffee that had gone cold before I'd finished them, and I was doing my absolute best to let any of that show on my face when I walked to table 11. "Are you all right?" he asked. Before I'd even said good evening. "I'm fine," I said automatically. He set his menu down. His eyes moved over my face in that careful cataloging way. "You're not." The bluntness of it caught me so off guard that I laughed. A real one. The kind that surprised even me. "I've been doing this long enough that most people can't tell," I said. "Most people aren't paying attention." I didn't know what to say to that. He went back to his menu, which I understood was his way of giving me an out. I took it. We didn't talk about it again that night, but when I brought his check, there was a folded piece of paper next to it. I waited until he'd left to open it. It was his name, Dorian Voss, and a phone number. Below it, in handwriting that was precise and unhurried, "If you ever want to talk about whatever it is that made you look like that tonight." I stood at the server station for a full 30 seconds just looking at it. I didn't call. But I kept the paper. 3 weeks passed. The cardiologist recommended a new monitoring protocol for Ethan. My hours got cut after New Year's because January was always slow. I picked up a weekend brunch shift at another place downtown and told myself this was fine. This was manageable. I had been managing longer than most people knew. Then, on a Sunday morning in late January, I was walking out of the pharmacy on 72nd, with Ethan's new prescription in one hand and my phone in the other, doing the math on the copay in my head, when I heard someone say my name, Ren. I turned around. Dorian Voss was standing outside a coffee shop I'd never been inside because the latties cost $9. He was in what I'd come to understand was his weekend uniform. Dark jeans, a coat that probably cost more than my rent, that watchful stillness he carried everywhere. Beside him stood a man in a black coat, who was clearly not a friend, more of a fixture. I've thought about this moment 100 times since then, what I should have done differently. Said a polite hello, and moved on. Put the paper in the recycling where it probably belonged. Ethan, who had no sense of self-preservation, looked up at the tall man with the serious face and said, with complete confidence, "You're really big. Did you play basketball?" Something happened to Dorian's expression, just for a second. Like a door opened onto a room that was warm and lit, and then quietly closed again. "I played rugby," he said, crouching down to Ethan's level. "A long time ago. Did you win?" Ethan asked, usually. Ethan considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old deciding whether someone was trustworthy. "Cool," he said finally, and went back to pulling at my hand. Dorian stood. His eyes met mine. There was a question in them I didn't want to answer. "I have to get him home," I said. "Of course." He paused. "The coffee here is worth the price if you're ever curious. It wasn't an invitation exactly. Or it was, but it was the kind that left the door open instead of pushing you through it. I thought about that for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I texted the number from the paper. He responded within minutes. We had coffee the following Saturday without Ethan, with Mrs. Kowalski watching the clock and me watching my phone. Dorian arrived exactly on time, ordered without looking at the menu, and spent the first 10 minutes asking about the wine program at Anchor and Salt, in a way that felt like he was giving me something easy to stand on while I found my footing. I told him about Ethan eventually. Not everything, just the murmur, the monitoring, the way it sat in the back of my mind like a stone I was always aware of, even when everything was fine. I'd expected him to do what most people did, which was look slightly uncomfortable and redirect to something lighter. He didn't. He asked questions, careful ones. What did the cardiologist say about long-term prognosis? What was the current treatment plan? What did I need that I wasn't getting? No one had ever asked me the last one. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I need to stop feeling like one bad month away from everything falling apart." He was quiet for a moment, both hands around his coffee cup. Then, "That's a reasonable thing to need." Something about the plainness of it, no reassurance, no fixed smile, just acknowledgement, made my eyes sting in a way I hadn't expected. I changed the subject fast. He let me. We met for coffee 3 more times before he asked me to dinner. and 3 dinners before I understood that something had shifted past the point I could casually walk back from. He was careful with me in a way I wasn't used to, which I might have found patronizing if it hadn't felt so specifically calibrated. Not careful like I was fragile, but careful like I was something he didn't want to break by moving too fast. I noticed things about him slowly. The way conversations around him changed when he entered a room, voices dropping, people subtly repositioning. The way the man in the black coat was always somewhere nearby. The way he answered certain phone calls in another language. Russian, I thought, though I didn't ask. The way he talked about his business, real estate holdings, a private equity firm, something in logistics, in terms that were technically specific, but somehow never quite concrete enough to picture. I told myself it wasn't my business. I had enough of my own to manage. That was, of course, exactly when it became my business. It was a Thursday evening in March. Dorian and I had been, whatever we were, for almost 2 months. I'd made arrangements for Ethan, met Dorian for dinner, at a place in Tribeca I'd never have been able to afford on my own, and we'd been together for 3 hours when he said quietly that there was something he needed to tell me. I thought he was ending it. I already had my face ready. Instead, he said, "There's a man named Garrett who has been watching you for the past week. He's not connected to me. He's connected to someone who wants to use you to reach me." I stared at him. He continued, "I want to be honest with you because you deserve to know the risk, and because I need to know if you trust me enough to let me handle this." I felt the blood drain out of my face, slow, and then all at once. "Ethan" was the first thing I said. Dorian's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something became very focused and very still. "He's safe. He has been watched over since last Tuesday. I made sure before I said anything to you. I thought about Ethan at Mrs. Kowalski's. I thought about the man in the black coat who I'd assumed was simply a security formality." "What are you?" I asked, and I didn't mean it rhetorically. He met my eyes. Honest and direct in a way that didn't offer comfort. "I'm a man who built something powerful through methods that weren't always clean. I run legitimate businesses now. I'm in the process of restructuring the rest. But there are people from before that transition who see my current position as an opportunity, who would use anyone close to me as a pressure point if they thought they could." I said nothing for a long moment. The candle between us guttered in some draft neither of us had felt. "How close am I?" I asked finally. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "Close enough that I should have told you sooner. Close enough that I'm telling you now." I drove home in a borrowed silence, Dorian's car following mine at a distance he thought I couldn't see. I didn't call him for 4 days. On the 4th day, he texted, "I'm not going to ask you to make a decision under pressure, but I'd like to explain, if you'll let me. I thought about Ethan's cardiologist bills. I thought about the way Dorian looked at my son, like he was something that mattered, not a complication to be managed. I thought about the man named Garrett, who had been watching me for a week without my knowledge, and whether that was more dangerous now or less now that I knew. I texted back, "Tell me everything. Start at the beginning." He came to my apartment, which he hadn't done before. He sat on my couch, too large for the space, too expensive for the neighborhood, and he talked for 2 hours straight. He'd grown up in Brighton Beach. His father had come from Yekaterinburg with nothing, and built a network through what Dorian described with precise, unapologetic language as organized protection and asset management, which meant, when I pressed, that his father had run half of Brooklyn's underground economy for 20 years. Dorian had come up inside that world, had taken it over when his father had his first stroke at 61, and had spent the last 4 years dismantling it from the inside, moving money into legitimate holdings, cutting ties with people who couldn't be cut cleanly, managing the fallout from those who felt they'd been left behind. The man named Garrett worked for someone called Vance, who was one of those people. Old network, old grievances, the kind of resentment that festers when someone leaves without them. "They've been watching to see if there's someone who could be leverage," Dorian said. "And they decided that was me," I said. "Yes." I looked at him sitting in the orange lamplight of my living room, his hands loose in his lap, his coat still on, because he hadn't been sure I'd ask him to stay. I thought about all the things a reasonable person would say in this situation. Everything that a woman with a sick kid and 2 jobs and no safety net should understand about self-preservation. I'm not running from this, I said. But I need to understand your world, the real version. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's not a small thing to ask, I know. I need it anyway. He took a breath, and then he told me, I understood implicitly that there were things he would never tell me. Parts of the before that were sealed for reasons that had as much to do with my protection as his own. But the shape of it, the structure, where he was now versus where he'd been. What was legitimate, what was in transition, what was still tangled and difficult, and not something I would be proud of if I looked at it too directly. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I said, Is Ethan actually safe? As safe as I can make anyone. He met my eyes. I don't make promises I can't keep. But I can tell you that no one will reach him through me. That's not a line I would ever allow to be crossed. And the man named Garrett. He'll stop being a concern by the end of the week. I thought about asking what that meant. I decided deliberately not to. I also have to ask something harder, I said. Ask, if Ethan is old enough someday to understand who you are, what your family built, if he asks me whether this was worth it, I need to be able to tell him something true. Dorian looked at me for a long time. Something moved through his expression, not the usual control, but something underneath it. Raw in a way I hadn't seen from him before. My younger brother is the reason I started dismantling the business, he said. Not my father's death, not federal pressure. Lev. He was 23 when someone took him to make a point. We got him back after 6 months, but he stopped. He's fine now. He's in Portland. He teaches high school. He's building a life that looks nothing like the one he was born into. And that happened because I was still living in the old world fully. Because I hadn't yet understood that you can't occupy that space without it costing people you love. He paused. I can't undo what I've built, but I can decide what it becomes, and I want it to become something that Ethan could look at and not be ashamed of. That's what I'm working toward, whether it takes 2 years or 10. The apartment was very quiet. From down the hall, I could hear the small sounds of Ethan sleeping. A cough, a shift, the creak of his mattress. You should have told me earlier, I said. Yes, he agreed. That's not okay. No, it isn't. He didn't justify it, didn't explain it away. Just sat with the weight of it, which was somehow more disarming than any argument could have been. I picked up my tea, which had gone cold. I need to think. Of course. Don't contact me for a few days. Let me do this properly. He nodded, stood, buttoned his coat. At the door he paused, his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, Ren, he said, using my name the way he rarely did, carefully like it was specific. I've been trying to be worthy of whatever this is since the night you recommended the wine, without checking what I was willing to spend. That hasn't changed. Then he left. I sat in my living room for a long time after that. I made 2 lists. The kind you make when a decision is too big to hold in your head all at once. Everything that said leave, the danger, the uncertainty. Ethan growing up inside a world with edges. The part of me that had spent 5 years learning to need no one and was deeply afraid of forgetting how. Everything that said stay. The way Dorian looked at Ethan, like he was a person worth taking seriously. The 4 months of careful, undramatic consistency. The fact that he had told me the truth, when a lie would have been easier and probably more effective. The stay column got longer the longer I looked at it. On the 3rd day, Ethan asked me, out of nowhere, over breakfast, whether Dorian was going to come over again, and I said I didn't know, and he said, in the matter-of-fact way of a child who has decided something, I hope so. He knows a lot about fish. I called Dorian that afternoon. He answered on the 2nd ring. I have conditions, I said. He said, tell me. Ethan comes first, every time. Not as a concept, not when it's convenient. First. Understood. No lying. Not by omission. Not by redirection. If there's something you can't tell me, you say you can't tell me. Not that there's nothing to tell. A brief pause. That I can do. And I'm not a prop. Not a fixture. I need to be part of decisions that affect our lives. My voice matters. You've never been a prop, Ren. He said it quietly, with a certainty that felt like it came from somewhere specific. From the very beginning, you've been the one I've been trying to keep up with. Something in my chest cracked open, just slightly, in a way I decided to let stand. There's one more thing, I said. Ask. My old boss at Anchor and Salt left me a voicemail 2 weeks ago. There's an assistant sommelier position opening up at a wine bar in the West Village. Better hours, no doubles, actual career potential. I didn't apply because I couldn't afford the pay cut in the gap between start and first check. Another silence. I'd like to apply. I know, I'm not asking you to give me money. I'm telling you that if we're going to do this properly, I need to be building something of my own. Not just living inside whatever you're building. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with something that sounded like it might have been admiration, you should apply. I'll make sure the transition gap isn't a problem. And not as a gift, as a loan, with terms you set. I hadn't expected that, the specificity of it, the way it acknowledged the difference between dependence and support. All right, I said. All right, he echoed. Does this mean you're staying? I looked at the window. Outside, March was doing its transitional thing, still cold, but with light in it, the kind that promises something on the other side. I'm staying, I said. But Dorian, if at any point I feel like I was wrong about who you're trying to be, if the world you're dismantling follows us home, I will take Ethan and I will leave. That's not a threat, it's just the truth. I know, he said. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to. 6 months later, we were standing outside a brownstone in Carroll Hill that Dorian had mentioned, once in passing, that he'd been thinking about. A real house, a yard, the kind of address where Ethan could ride a bike to school and nobody would look twice. He was holding Ethan on his back, who was trying to see over the fence into the backyard, one small hand fisted in Dorian's collar for balance. I looked at the two of them and felt something settle in my chest. Quiet and specific. Nothing dramatic about it. Just recognition. Can we really live here? Ethan asked. Dorian looked at me. We're thinking about it, I said. I want a dog, Ethan said immediately. Dorian made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You mentioned. A big one. Like actually big. That can probably be arranged. Ethan said something else about the backyard, and Dorian answered him in that patient, attentive way he had that I was still, 6 months in, not entirely used to. I reached out and put my hand in Dorian's. He squeezed, not making a thing of it. That evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep in the car on the way home and been carried inside, with the careful efficiency of someone who'd been practicing for a while, Dorian and I sat in the kitchen, with the overhead light off and the lamp on, the way we had by now every night that we were in the same place. He said quietly, I want to show you something. He set a folder on the table between us. Property transfer documents, holding company registrations, letters from federal compliance attorneys. The paper trail of 4 years of methodical, unglamorous dismantling. The kind of work that nobody congratulated you for because it looked, from the outside, like nothing happening at all. I looked at them for a long time. This is almost done, he said. Another 18 months, maybe less. And then the name Voss means something completely different than it did when I inherited it. I looked up at him. He was watching me the way he had at Anchor and Salt on that first Tuesday. Carefully, like he was trying to understand something. What do you want it to mean? I asked. Something his expression was quieter now, more open than it usually let itself be. Something that a kid could grow up carrying and feel good about. He paused. Something worth what it cost. I reached across and closed the folder. I believe you, I said. I want you to know that. I don't think I believed it at the beginning, but I do now. He took my hand, both of them the way he did when something mattered enough to hold with both hands. Ren, he said. I know, I said. I feel it too. It wasn't the most articulate thing either of us had ever said, but some things don't need architecture. They just need to be said into the right silence, at the right time, by people who have spent long enough being careful with each other to know the difference. We sat like that for a while, in the kitchen that wasn't ours yet, but might be, in the life that had been unimaginable a year ago, and was now the one I was most afraid of losing. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. Somewhere down the hall, Ethan slept with his stuffed dog tucked under one arm, the plush kind, for now, until the Carroll Hill yard became real, and a real one followed behind. And I thought, this is the thing I almost didn't choose. This specific quiet, this particular man, this life that had come from the least sensible direction, and arrived at something that felt more like home than anything I'd built carefully and alone. I was glad I hadn't walked away from it. I was glad every single day that I hadn't walked away.